gentlemen, we are live!
Hello, Night Nation. I'm Andrew Phegley. Welcome to UCF Knightline Podcast Live. Welcome to 1148 Studios. Welcome Kyle Israel and Carson Engel, Trylko. Glad that y'all are joining us tonight. We got a lot to talk about. I don't know where to start, but glad that y'all are here. We're trying to do this for the first time, and I'm quite nervous, so I think it's going to be fine. But so where do we want to start? Trace, maybe you can.
Well, it has been a busy couple of weeks for the UCF Night Nation. Hiring of a new athletic director, hiring of a new head football coach. What are your reactions to first Danny White and then as well Scott Frost?
First of all, I think the hire of Danny White was really the most pivotal one in this whole grand scheme of changing everything over from Todd Stansberry to the George O'Leary stint as the athletic director, and we saw how that went. But I think that Danny White was somebody, when you talk about new young blood at the age of 36, his bloodlines with his father being the athletic director at Duke, his brother being the head basketball coach at Florida. I'm repeating things that many people already know. But I thought that hire was crucial. I thought it was very well planned out. And he had just enough experience, in my opinion, as an athletic director at Buffalo to really know the day-to-day operations. I think that's important to figure out how to do that job. But when you can call your dad at Duke, and when you can call different mentors across college athletics like Danny White has the ability to do, I think that's the type of guy that we want here at UCF. And so I thought that was a great hire by Dr. Hitt. Him and his staff and the search committee and Parker Research, they did an incredible job with that, because there was, Danny White was a guy that was considered from the beginning, but we didn't really know if that was going to be the guy that they decided to go with. And so I thought that was huge. And then obviously the hire of Scott Frost. Carson may have a little bit different opinion than do I in that regard. But the hire of Scott Frost was, in my opinion, very good. We stayed with kind of the young, dynamic coach that's going to be crucial for recruiting, in my opinion, and we're already seeing that kind of play out. So I thought they were two great hires.
Carson, you have a different opinion on at least the Scott Frost.
A little bit, yeah. Obviously, the Danny White hire was huge. I thought that, like Kyle mentioned, with the bloodlines, it's going to be a really good hire. He has so much experience to lean on. Even though he may be a young athletic director, he has that pedigree and those people behind him that he can reach out to in college athletics. For me, the Scott Frost hire is just sort of a wait and see. I thought if you looked at the candidates that we interviewed or that were reported to be interviewed, that he was the guy that probably has the least experience coming in for the job. So it's a little bit of a wild card maverick hire. I think everyone was surprised when it happened. Everyone obviously kind of rallied to it and liked it for certain factors that he kind of brings to the table. But I do have, I guess, some reservations perhaps about his hiring, that maybe I would have felt a little more comfortable with some of the other guys that had head coaching experience coming into the decision.
Now, Danny White had said that he might bring some different names into the mix than we had heard. We haven't heard where Scott Frost came into this. What role do you think White may have played in his name coming into the to the mix?
Well, I think he was instrumental in it, really. I was almost surprised, because I was telling people on my show leading into it that I thought, you know what, really, Danny White's going to be a new AD here. He's not even going to officially start until, I think, Monday today. Coming up here is going to be his first day. So I thought that Dr. Hitt would really take more of a leadership role in the hire, and it seems to be that he kind of obviously was a part of it, was a consultant, was there in the room, but I think he let Danny White make a lot of his own decisions in regarding the situation.
Is there any concern for you guys about this being on-the-job training for Frost in terms of a head coaching role?
Well, I think when you look back and take a step back, okay, we've had George O'Leary since 2004. UCF at that point in time was not a powerhouse football program. I still don't think we're a powerhouse football program. But George was here for so long and did so many great things that the expectation level is so high among the fan base because of the success that we've had, that I think it's okay to still take risk at the point in time of where UCF athletics is still. We're still very young. We are in a recruiting hotbed. There's been a lot of money put behind this program, but I think taking a chance on a guy like, and I do agree with you, Carson, that much of that is to be found out in regards to the success that we all think he can have, but can he actually have that success? Is he actually a really good head coach? We don't know that yet. We think he can be. So I still think that we're at a point in time where we can take that type of kind of leap of faith and let him learn on the job. And one of the things that I think that will help Scott out is his ability to reach out to the coaching tree that he's played for and coached under, and Bill Parcells, obviously Chip Kelly, and some of the many, having played defense in the NFL and playing for some of the top defensive coaches in the NFL. I think that he's very dynamic in his experience. It would be really hard to find a guy that is this that brings this style of offense, but also has actually played on the defensive side of the football at the highest levels. It would be really hard to find that mixture of type of experience in any candidate out there. And so I think that when you add all those things together, he's a very intriguing and a good hire in my opinion, but one that may be hard to find in any other years to come based on his pedigree and where he's from.
Well, on that point, Carson, what do you think of the hires that have been announced so far? Just a couple so far, and we still don't have a defensive coordinator hire.
Right.
What do you make of these? These are guys that have not come from big Power 5 jobs, some smaller schools.
Yeah, we were talking about that, before we went on, and a lot of the guys obviously are coming from different backgrounds, but certainly they have experience with Scott Frost, and that's kind of what you would expect. And right now, really, it was just a matter of, hey, let's get a couple guys on the ground because we still have this week of open recruiting. So let me get a couple guys I know, bring them in that I know can reach out to prospects and kind of scan the state and the country well, and I think that's what he did. Now you're going to see him maybe go back to the drawing board a little bit. I mean, it's funny, even the guys that he's hired, their official titles have not been announced yet. So I think he goes back to the drawing board maybe this upcoming week and says, okay, let me fill in some spots here, because it's still pretty much a skeleton staff, especially on the defensive side of things. He may go outside of his tree for a couple hires. He's going to have to do interviews for those. And those were things that he really didn't have time to do in this week, where it was so important to get UCF at least up to speed as much as possible in recruiting. So I think we really won't know too much about how the overall staff looks until we're a couple weeks down the road here.
And of course, Scott Frost was a quarterback at Nebraska. Kyle Israel was quarterback of the UCF Knights, and we have just witnessed an 0-12 season with several quarterbacks unable to get the job done. Let's talk a little bit about the returning quarterbacks, what you saw from them this season, and one of the questions that we got in the lead up to the live broadcast, which quarterback on the roster best fits Frost's system? So let's talk about the quarterbacks.
Well, and that's really a difficult question to answer, to be quite candid with you, because I'm not sure any of them truly fit the system that he's going to run. I'm not sure that any of them, had Scott Frost been here during the recruitment, would have been guys that he would have recruited or selected throughout the process. So when you break it down, I mean, what do we have to go by? We look at Oregon's offense and see the quarterbacks that they've had in the past, and that's really the only snapshot of what we think that they would like to have at quarterback. You look at Marcus Mariota and some of the other guys that they've had out at Oregon are dual threat guys that can run the football, guys that can throw the football, guys that get rid of the ball quickly. When you look at Bo Schneider's release, when you look at Tyler Harris's, and even Justin Holman's release, a little bit of a longer release in regards to throwing the football. And I don't know that any of them are even close to as fleet of foot as what they've had out at Oregon. Now, what's going to show us whether or not Scott Frost is the type of coach that we think he can potentially be, based on not having a quarterback yet in this recruiting class? Because there may be somebody along the way that he signs that he thinks fits the system better going into next season, and that's yet to be determined. But I think you still got to look at Justin Holman if you're trying to look at all of those things, from running the football to the zone read game, And I know that nobody really did anything this year from a passing perspective. Although Tyler Harris maybe at Tulane when he played really well when he entered the game at Tulane, but I don't think any of those other Bo or Tyler really did anything that showed me they should have been on the field ahead of Justin. And Justin at that was really struggling. So I think Justin is probably the guy if we don't bring in somebody who we think can play right away. But I think Justin's still that quarterback that we would have to go with based on what we know, which isn't a lot. And then for Bo and Tyler, it'll be interesting. I don't. The one thing that I don't want to do is I don't want to write these guys off before they have an opportunity to even have a playbook in front of them, before they have an opportunity to go through spring practice. I don't think it's right on behalf of the fan base who supports this university and these kids to say he has no shot. I mean, we can think about it all day long, whether or not we think they have a shot, but I want to give Bo, give Tyler, and give Justin the opportunity to get in there and get coached by this head coach that we just hired, to see if maybe they can do something, and see if Coach Frost sees something in them that maybe we just don't see with the untrained eye.
And I think something that's important to remember, just to play off that too, is the ability of this offense not to just be maybe what we have known it to be. We had a guy on our show from Oregon, a media guy, that basically said, look, in the transition from Marcus Mariota to Vernon Adams, the kid that they brought in from Eastern Washington, the FCS level, to run the offense this year, they didn't do nearly as much in the zone read as they did under Mariota because it just didn't fit into what Adams was comfortable with. So even though the three guys on the roster right now might not look like typical Oregon offense Scott Frost guys, that doesn't mean that Scott Frost isn't going to tinker and kind of play to their strengths. And even he said, I believe, that that's kind of what they've done, that he's taken what Chip's done, and it isn't exactly what Chip's done, that they've done different things under Frost that maybe they hadn't done before. So it may be, even early on, especially with the skill players around them and kind of trying to build this thing up, it may not be exactly what we're used to seeing in Oregon, but it may be some sort of moderated version of that.
I got a crazy question. How about the offensive line or the quarterback? Which being more important in this offense of Scott Frost? I mean, because we saw what can happen this year without an offensive line. An offensive line that struggles, mightily. So, we do have a couple of guys at quarterback. I know they're looking at some other guys, but I think offensive line, personally, is the most important thing in this run read or whatever you want to call it offense.
Well, it's going to be, in my opinion, it's probably going to be a different style of offensive lineman than what we've recruited in the past. Now, I know that we got some young guys that got a lot of experience this year, and they struggled at times. We talked about it at the beginning of the season. The offensive line really struggling. I did think that they got better throughout the course of the year, and that's what happens. I mean, it's very frustrating because we harped on youth the whole season, right? Every week we were talking about this team is so young and we're so banged up, but it's not one of those things you can say, yeah, but too. We're just young, and there's not a whole lot you can do to fix young. It's just kind of the phase that you're in. And so the best thing that you can do in the way that guys get better, I think back to our last winless season in 2004, we played 20 true freshmen that year, and not all of us were the most highly recruited guys, but playing in 11 games, even though we lost, I can think of the Sharif Rashads of the world, the Jason Vincents of the world, the Josh Sittons of the world. They got so much better from the experience they had in our winless season in 2004, and that transition to 2005, we won 8 football games, played for a conference championship, and played in the Hawaii Bowl, and I guarantee you the amount of games that us young guys played in 2004, that had a lot to do with the success in 2005. And so I think that there are going to be players on this team that you don't recognize from what we saw on the field this year because so much maturation goes on between that first and second year. And I think that will really help us. But offensive line, we're going to need a more agile offensive lineman. We're going to need guys that get up to the second level better than what we saw this year, because a lot of times in this offense, and again, it may be a moderated version, but this zone read, the play may turn into a pass, but it may originally have been a run. And a play may be a run, but there also may be a pass option involved. And to be able to do that type of offense, you have to have linemen that can get to the second level, that can get to the linebackers. And especially in the screen game where you see these teams, Clemson does it quite a bit, throwing out on the edge. You see these guards and tackles scampering out there to get to block these linebackers and safeties down the field. That's a crucial part of this offense, is offensive linemen that can get down the field and block, not just block between the tackles 2 or 3 yards down the field. And so we need that type of agile, nasty, athletic linemen in the offense that we've seen at Oregon in the past. And so either the guys that we have now are going to have to transition into that, or like you've seen today with some of the JUCO signees, these are guys that can get down the field and block down the field, and I think that's going to be crucial. So I think for the success, especially next season, the offensive line is going to be extremely crucial.
Well, like you said, with a couple of the guys that signed, or didn't sign, but made a commitment today to come here, junior college guys. Junior college guys make things better right away. Mm-hmm. Those guys will play. Those guys aren't guys that will sit, wait a year to play. Those are the guys that come in and start like right now most of the time. You know, and from the film that I've seen on those guys are those kind of linemen, and that's why they went after them, obviously. So I'm excited about that. I forgot to say, we had a couple technical issues going on at the very beginning. Is that why you wandered off? That's why I wandered off. I apologize for that. I had to go, fix something real quick. I will say that this is being brought to you by the Little Greek, if I did not say that tonight earlier.
Appreciate that.
Is it open tonight, or with you here?
We're open for another hour. I hope that it's not burning down.
And this is the first time you've been away on a Sunday night, correct?
It's the first time I haven't been on a Sunday night.
So it's like a father leaving his kid for the first time.
There were no technical difficulties going on at the Little Greek.
All right, so wanted to get that out of there. What about running backs? How important are running backs in this offense? This is we've struggled at running back. There's not a lot of positions that we didn't struggle at this year, but one of them definitely was running backs. I think more because of the offensive line than the actual running backs, but are there running backs that you think fit into this offense?
I feel like they both can play. We've been talking about Taj McGowan and C.J. Jones. I think they both can play. It seems to me that what they're going to do is there's going to be a lot of different guys in the backfield. You're not going to see that bell cow running back that we saw under George O'Leary, like a Kevin Smith, like a Latavius Murray. It's going to be a divergence of different guys and styles that we see in the backfield, and even, with wide receivers and running sweeps. And so guys are almost going to be, when you're talking about skill position players, under Frost, I think you're going to have a lot of guys that are sort of positionless, and they're just athletes. And again, we keep bringing up the recruiting, but that's sort of what we've seen this week in recruiting with a guy like Jacques Barriere out of Dr. Phillips, who's a 5'8" guy. He could be a scat back, he could be a little wide receiver, he could do a lot of different things on the field, and he's fast. Same thing with Adrian Killens, the kid that they plucked out of Daytona Mainland. So those are a couple guys that really are like, if you're going to say, okay, what's the textbook Scott Frost offensive playmaker, those two guys pretty much fit the mold.
And when we're talking about Frost, one of the things that he said during his press conference was that he wanted to emphasize recruiting in Florida. And as we talk about Frost being sort of this extreme away from O'Leary, have you noticed that? Picked up some cues from the early contacts that Frost and his limited staff have made so far, that there's been an emphasis on local?
There's no question. I mean, I've covered high school football in Orlando for 4 or 5 years now, and honestly got kind of tired of just people always talking to me, obviously knowing that I'm an alum and a big UCF supporter and fan, and why aren't they recruiting Central Florida? Why aren't they looking at this kid? Why aren't they looking at that kid? Why don't they have a relationship with this school? And it was just sort of the way that things went under Coach O'Leary. There were assistants that tried to make inroads in Central Florida, and certainly we had our fair share of talent that we got from the region, but everyone always kind of thought that, hey, they could do more, they could be more involved. And it just was a kind of what I think, looking at the recruiting strategy of UCF over the years and looking at what teams do nationally, it wasn't a situation where these kids want to get offered. And they want to get offered early. And especially if you're at a school like a non-Power 5 like UCF, you have to jump on those kids early and be with them and build that relationship to maybe override what some of the glitz and the glamour of the Power 5 schools that could come in later and pluck these guys. So that wasn't something that George O'Leary ever really wanted to do. He wanted to evaluate tape and make those decisions a little bit later on in the process than a lot of coaches, I think, around the country. So you're seeing that now. I think I've even seen Scott Frost offering maybe a sophomore in that mix, several juniors, and recruiting the area. The first 3 kids, Seminole here here in Sanford, you've got Dr. Phillips, and then Mainland out on the coast. So that was an early message that, hey, we're going to build our base. We're going to go everywhere for talent, but we're going to build our base right here in Central Florida. And I think that was very quickly responded to in a very positive way by everyone that follows the high school scene locally, and certainly the coaches. Going forward, I'm interested to see, because you can always come in and you're the buzzworthy guy and you've got the name recognition, but going forward, I'll be interested to see how they foster those relationships and build them in the area.
I think one of the things to look at when you talk about, the relationship that Coach O'Leary and his staff, and I'll really say Coach O'Leary because he set the precedence for recruiting and how we recruited. A guy that played with me here at UCF in 2004, 2005, Kareem Reed, defensive lineman for us, was a transfer in from Kentucky. He is now the head football coach down at Coconut Creek. And Coconut Creek, if you know anything about them, they have 3 Army All-Americans on their team this year, one of the most talented high school teams in the country when you look at overall prospects. And he was not even willing. A guy that played for Coach O'Leary was very vocal about his distaste with the way that we recruited, when we started recruiting his players. And the one thing that I certainly agree with him is that Coach O'Leary got to the point where he was offering players and expecting a response fairly immediately. And if you don't commit, we're going to move on. And that sends a negative connotation to
Old
just
school.
Very old school, and the type of coach that you're going to potentially be when they come there to play for you. And a guy like Kareem Reed, who has so much talent on his team down at Coconut Creek, for him to be excited about Coach Frost. And we have a former players kind of like Facebook group chat that we all get in there and talk about what's going on. Coach O'Leary's tenure the last couple of years since he's been down at Coconut Creek. In that group chat, it was very obvious that if he felt that way, then I'm sure that resonated with a lot of other high school coaches. And obviously he wanted some of his players to go to UCF and wanted to support the program. But for us to not have one-day camps where we're bringing recruits on campus for one-day camps that allows them to see the school and allows us to evaluate the players, for us not to do that just blew my mind, quite frankly. And so I think that there's some different things in the recruiting process that we're going to have to do, and you've seen those take place. But I'm going to give you a small example, and this is a personal example of mine. My cousin, being at Lake Nona last year, being a 4-year starter, breaking every passing record in the state of Florida high school football history. It was basically, I've been told from a son of a former coach that many people like here, that the reason that my cousin wasn't offered, who in the beginning of his recruiting process would have committed and came to UCF, I can tell you that for sure, before Clemson and Florida and some of these other schools came into the mix. He did not offer my cousin, from what I've been told, based on my relationship with the university and the media. And so when you're making recruiting decisions based on that, now
You're pretty powerful.
I can't tell you 100% that that's the case, but I have been told by somebody that I trust that that's one of the big reasons. This person's father wanted to offer my cousin and was told not to because of my role in the media, which is not that big at all, if anything.
You're on the Knightline podcast.
Now that I'm back in the U.S., it's coming back a little bit. But, that just made me scratch my head and say, can I really trust that was the actual reason?
And where did he go, your cousin?
He's at Clemson now.
Yeah.
He's at Clemson now.
And where are they? They turned out all right.
Yeah. So, that's just interesting.
Hopefully with Scott Frost being here and Danny White being here, some of these politics things will go away. I guess with any new regime, there's always, I say regime, and it sounds bad, I guess. You can think of some regimes that weren't so good, but things change as far as that goes. So hopefully that's going to be better. I mean, one of the biggest things that, I know this is a little bit, off topic of what we've been talking about right here, but that's what I do. It's okay. Everybody knows that I'll throw the switch in the thing every once in a while and make it a completely different thing. One of the biggest things that people have talked to me about and asked me about, and all of us, I think, are little things like that we feel that are little, like uniforms, helmets, the end zones being painted differently. But that's what I think matters to recruits more than a lot of people understand. It's those things that, Oregon had 12 uniforms, and
things, right? So all of those things, not only from a recruiting standpoint, also from a fan engagement standpoint. When you mentioned some things like the end zones, people get excited for jerseys, new scoreboards, new improvements to the stadium. All those are kind of things that we'll see what Danny White and Scott Frost team up to do. I think they'll make a lot of changes there. Again, you're talking about UCF. I think we're pretty much on a tight budget in terms of the way that we have to run things and where we're competing and the level that we're at right now. But those guys are going to make the most out of those opportunities, and I think all those small things do add up to, you kind of hear people complain about jerseys, and it sounds silly when you just look at it as people complaining about jerseys. But then if you kind of pull it out broader and look at all of these little things and you start to add them up, then it's a whole new push of momentum in a positive direction.
I think what these high schoolers are being exposed to, I mean, last week before St. Thomas Aquinas played in the state high school football championship game, Nike brought a Nike logoed Lamborghini out to their facility in their practice and revealed to them their new cleats that they were going to wear in the state championship game. Nike is making it evident that branding matters, and they are on campuses. And they are in these kids' faces, and when they open up, a wood box, and there's a cleat on laying on its side, cleats up, and it just gives you an idea of how important Nike thinks that these kids look into that type of thing. And so yes, it is a bunch of little things, but at the same time, these high schoolers are being exposed to this right away when it comes to branding and what things look like and how they feel. And so I think that is important. Another small thing, for example, that I recognized when I was up at the Clemson-Florida State game that I think Dabo Sweeney and his staff did really well is prior to the game and during timeouts, kind of like the Miami Heat have down in American Airlines Arena, is they have a DJ. And they have a DJ that's up on the Jumbotron, and he's not actually on the side of the field. He's up somewhere in a room, but he's there DJing, and you can see all the recruits down in the recruiting section nodding their head, and you see the players excited on the sidelines, and it just you're in a town like Clemson, South Carolina, but the music in that stadium was hip hop and up-tempo music and current hip-hop up-tempo music, and I noticed that, and the fans buy into that, and recruits see that, and the players are jumping around on the field. So that was just I was like, wow, that would be really cool if we had that in Bright House, because we do have a very engaged student section. We do have a student section that likes to be involved in the game. And if we had a DJ at our game, playing that type of music, it's not always all about the fans and that experience, but we need those kids that are sitting down there in that little section just to the left of the tunnel where we run out, that are all recruits, to really enjoy the atmosphere of the football game. And these big schools understand that. What separates a Clemson from an Alabama, from an Auburn, from a Georgia? It's the little things that separate them. And I think that's why those little things become so important when you get to this level.
Well, hey, I've even heard fans complain about the music, right? So I don't think a DJ would be unwelcome to the fan base. So
one of the little things that Coach Frost was asked about was names on uniforms, and he said, I don't see why that is a big deal, because a player is proud of his name. When you put on the uniform and were told that your name was not going to be on that, what did you feel then about that?
I didn't feel very good about it, because my freshman year we had our names on the back of our uniforms, and we went 0-11, and that offseason coach announced that nobody was ever going to wear the number 1 again, and we were never going to have names on our jerseys again, because it was all about the team, which you buy into it at the time because that's the culture that you're currently in, and yeah, who cares at the time. We're UCF and rah, rah, rah. You kind of buy into it. I think if you listen to players talk in interviews over the years, they just spew out the same things that Coach O'Leary was preaching to them throughout the week. And those were very good things, and those were a good way for us to approach practices and opponents and each particular week. I think all those things worked very well for us. But when you come from high school and you don't have your name on your jersey, we did it at University High School. It means something. Now, I think I would be much more intrigued if, depending on the uniform I was playing in, I think I would be more excited about that. But there is that one piece of, for so long you're kind of known just by a number in high school. And to have your name on the back of your jersey and represent your family, on some level it's important. And I think that, the fans probably enjoy it a little bit more than the players, because now that I was a fan this year and we didn't have the big-time names that we have had in the past, I wish I had just a name on the jersey for flat out, who is that guy? Just so I could figure out who somebody was.
You had to go through the roster.
Right.
Yeah,
We weren't sure who was who.
That's important though for players to be seen as well on television. We're on ESPN all the time or whatever, and people really, who's that guy? Who is that? Especially when the people on the TV are calling them the wrong name and everything else.
You're not getting paid, right? And so we've heard so much about players being paid, but your name essentially at that point is your individual brand. And for many years now, that's kind of been wiped away on some level from each individual person. That was kind of your piece of individuality that you bring to the team, and that wasn't there. And we did have great seasons. So I mean, nobody was complaining about it when we were winning either.
I mean, at the time, it seemed like a good thing. I think.
Yeah.
But at some point, maybe you would have liked to see him go back. I don't know what would have been a good time to put the names back on the jerseys, but maybe that was a measure that was good for the time, but eventually sort of wore out its welcome, and it was just time to put the names back.
We've talked a lot about young players, and we would talk each week on the podcast about UCF was leading or doing well, and then something bad happened, and you could see the team deflate. That lack of confidence. How do you compare that to that previous winless season, Kyle, in that confidence? Did you see those same similarities where a team would deflate? The compare and the contrast of those two.
Well, we're talking a long time ago now in my head. No, I think for sure it was a little bit more evident this year, because even though we struggled in 2004, we still had some strong leadership on that football team, like Brandon Marshall, Atari Bigby, Mike Sims Walker. We had some strong figures on that team. We were just playing so many young guys that we still had some leadership, and we lost some games that year fairly close late in football games. And so I didn't see us ever deflate as much as I did this year. But when you have so much youth on a team, and then you have so many injuries that tie into that, and then you just have, we played a lot of youth that year, but it was kind of like if you didn't figure into the plan long term in 2004 and you were an older guy, you weren't going to be seeing the field more or less, because we knew we were going to struggle. Let's get the young guys who Coach O'Leary recruited on the field. Well, we recruited all the guys this year, and we only had 6 or 7 seniors, so you didn't have anybody to kind of motivate you moving forward. And plus, everything was ahead of us. We knew we were going to struggle. We knew that we weren't going to be that good that year. We knew that this was kind of a rebuilding time, and although this year could be looked at as a rebuilding season, we just came off 2 AAC championships, and so I think that guys not having experienced that much adversity thus far in the program's history since they've been there, they didn't really know who to look to, and then that leadership was gone, and then obviously the leadership that was on the staff, who knows what was going on inside that the football facility week to week. I guarantee you it's not everything that the public may have thought, with Coach O'Leary being on his way out and everything with Coach Key. And I don't think that it was football as usual like many other years as in the program as a whole this year, which obviously filtered into the football team.
Carson, a friend of mine who's not a UCF alum, thought going into this season that UCF had not capitalized fully on the Fiesta Bowl victory. And it's easy to look at 0-12 and say from a recruiting standpoint that they haven't. But you have Taj McGowan, you have Tristan Payton, you have Trey Quince, you have some guys. Is it still too early to say that the Fiesta Bowl didn't reap rewards?
If you're looking at the recruiting classes on paper, it didn't seem to me like they were much different than the ones we had before the Fiesta Bowl. So you're getting the same level of talent. Now, would I have liked to seen a boost in that? Of course, coming off of such a big win, such a high-profile win. I don't know if we maybe overvalue what that actually means in recruiting circles, because the next day, the day after New Year's, you're still the same program, you're still in the same area, you still have the same resources. So I don't know if maybe we kind of unfairly thought that, hey, now that we won the Fiesta Bowl, recruiting's just going to absolutely go through the roof. And also you've got to remember, of course, the scholarship restrictions that we had, so that's taking out a certain crop of players from those classes every year. So I thought that overall, the classes talent-wise, on paper, were about the same as what UCF had been getting, but down in numbers a little bit, you start to see things chip away, and certainly it didn't seem like there was any kind of boost in recruiting post-Fiesta Bowl.
Is that something that comes with being in those group of 5 schools, though? Is Houston's success this year the result of recruiting at a Power 5 level, or they just had a really good year?
Well, I think Houston's success this year is a result of the coaching, and when you're at the Group of 5 level, and even some Power 5 conference schools, maybe that have moved up, like a TCU, for instance, they've always been, and Boise State's always been like this for years and years. They get the guys they want and they like, and they coach them up. And they have excellent coaching staffs. So I think a lot of times when you're at that Group of 5 level, it is maybe more about coaching than recruiting. Now, with that being said, you look at Houston this year, what Tom Herman's doing in recruiting, and I think they have, at least according to one outlet, the 35th rated recruiting class in the nation. That's really impressive for a Group of 5 school. So can you sort of chip away and grab some of those big chip guys? Absolutely. And under a guy like Scott Frost, and building the whole Oregon offensive side of it, the excitement that brings, can there be a few guys that maybe chip away and you would think, hey, they're going to be high-level prospects as they come to UCF? Sure, but you're really going to be building your recruiting class at a Group of 5 level with guys who are pretty much rivals 3 stars, and you're going to coach them up.
Still, this is a program with 20 guys in the NFL, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, in mid-30s with number of players in the NFL. So Coach O'Leary and his staff through the year did do something right in terms of recruiting.
In that regard, I many conversations that I've had with guys like Kevin Smith, the likes of Brandon Marshall, Josh Sitton, those guys, they told me coming back from their experiences, they were so much more prepared walking into an NFL organization from the way that team meetings were approached to the full encompassing understanding of the game of football, how to watch film, what defenses were doing. For example, for me, Coach O'Leary had quarterbacks truly learn every aspect of a defense. And a lot of teams that run these different spread types of offenses, they'll just go in and say, on this play, you're eliminating this side of the field, and then you're just reading this one guy, right? That's how you're going to run. That's a lot of what Clemson does, based on my experience talking to my cousin and watching what they do. But before I could ever get the playbook at UCF that summer that I initially got there, I had to learn every single type of defense by a number. Like a plus 59 is like basically a 4-3 over, or 75 is basically like a 4-3 stack. But there's like 20 variations of defensive fronts that I had to learn with coverages and rotation behind them that I'm not sure when you got into game planning that all that stuff ever really mattered. But I had to learn that before I could ever learn an offensive play. And that was kind of par for the course throughout the program of just football knowledge and understanding schemes. And we were a true pro-style program. That's what we were. And so when these guys went to the next level, they understood a lot of those things that guys coming from other schools who had it all simplified for them, a lot of those guys really struggled. So to hear Brandon and Kevin and Josh especially up at Green Bay come back and say, dude, I was so far ahead of my rookie class because of the program you played in, that says a lot about what Coach O'Leary did in regards to that we won a lot of games with a lot less talent than other people had in the time here. And that is due to he was a very good football coach. He really, really was.
And that's something, guys, that when I looked at the Scott Frost hire, and maybe why I just didn't kind of jump right in and say, oh, this is the greatest hire, get extremely fired up about it, is that's something that I've really always liked about following UCF, being a fan, being an alum, and also doing media stuff and covering a lot of pro sports, is that it is awesome to be able to follow Kevin Smith, Brandon Marshall, Blake Bortles, Latavius Murray, all these guys filter into the league. Now, of course, Oregon has pros, they have guys in the NFL because they have that kind of talent, but like he kind of said about the offense in particular, I don't know that an Oregon system is the kind of system that best prepares guys for the league, so that's something that I'm interested to see about this program under Scott Frost, is will it be the same program that leads the Group of 5 in pro guys, or does that become quite different? And that's something that, just as a fan, and maybe that's just me, but that's something that that added to my fandom. That made it that made it more interesting, more fun to be a UCF fan, because we knew even whatever happens Saturday, we've got all these guys to go ahead and root for on Sundays as well.
A lot of offensive stars in this mix of NFL players. We haven't spent much time talking about defense. You know, that was a big hallmark of the George O'Leary era. UCF ranked 115th in defense, 126th against the pass. One of the questions that we got in, what defense best complements a high-octane, up-tempo offense? And a little bit more what you think Scott Frost may be looking for in terms of a defensive coordinator. An experienced guy, or is he going to go out and find someone like some of the coaches that have been hired so far?
See, this is the real wild card for me, because Scott Frost, like I mentioned before, has defensive experience, and he played in the Tampa 2 type of defense in Tampa Bay under Monty Kiffin. He was with Bill Parcells for a period of time in the NFL. I don't know that I know. I don't know that I know. That's funny. I'm not sure who he's considering as a coordinator. And as far as a defense that complements the spread, I think it's more of probably going to be a bend, don't break type of defense that tries to eliminate the big play. I mean, one thing that you always have to consider is throughout camp, right? And so that's 20-something practices, and throughout spring football, your defense gets pretty good at guarding what they see your offense run. And so they're going to be seeing these type of spread offenses, which are typically a 4-3 with a nickel in the game or a nickel and dime type of style defense that goes out and covers these spread defenses. Now, spread offenses. One thing that Coach O'Leary did so well over the years, in Conference USA especially, we played all these high-octane offenses. I think of the Tulsas of the world and Kevin Kolb in Houston back in the day. We defended the spread offense really, really well, and we didn't run a spread offense at UCF. So I think coaching plays a lot into that, but when you run a spread offense and your defense is on the field as much as they are, it comes down to points per possession. You know, one of the biggest stats in college football this year is when you look at these Big 12 teams and the type of offenses they go against in the Big 12 with the TCUs and the Baylors and the Oklahoma States and the Oklahomas. Many people say, well, these defenses really struggle in the Big 12. They give up so many points. They give up so many yards. Well, if you break it down over the course of the Big 12 season and over the course of the SEC season, and some of the most high-profile games, when you look at points per possession, for example, when it was Alabama-LSU, that game averaged 2.5 points per possession. And in the Oklahoma State Baylor game, or one of those big high-profile games in the Big 12, there was a ton of points and a ton of yards, but the points per possession was like 1.6. So you can't get enamored with the stats when you start to look at defenses that face spread offenses all the time, because there's just more possessions, especially when your team has a high-powered up and down the field offense. Your defense is just on the field for more plays and more possessions. So I think it's got to be one of those bend don't breaks, because if you think you're going to hit everybody in the mouth every play when you have 20 series a game, it's just not realistic when you have a high-powered offense that is up and down the field and off the field fairly quickly.
And to follow up on who he might hire, the guy that's been rumored is Eric Shenander, who's a linebackers coach at Oregon. He was even interviewed this week and said that there's been talks. I think that with their relationship, they coached together at Northern Iowa as well. You would think that if that guy was coming here, he would already be on board. That's just the way that I look at it. So, and he doesn't have a lot of experience on the defensive side of the ball. He was even an offensive coach earlier in his career. So I think it is important if you look at the overall staff, and obviously Coach Frost is going to call the plays on offense. That maybe minimizes the role of an offensive coordinator. That becomes a position that's more about salary than anything else. Name me the offensive coordinator, I'm going to get a higher cut of the budget than some of the other assistants. So I do think defensive coordinator is a critical hire, and maybe that position where Frost goes outside of his coaching tree and outside of guys that he knows personally. Maybe it's guys that he's gotten a good report back on from various defensive mentors that he's had, guys like Raheem Morris and Mike Tomlin, but maybe that's an experienced defensive coordinator that he goes through with an interview process and then hires and gives a lot of autonomy and control on that side of the ball to run the defense.
Another question that we had was, what are the easiest and hardest positions for UCF to recruit?
That's a good question.
Because it seems like UCF has always been good at getting these skilled players, and the names that have surfaced so far with Frost hired, yeah, he's going to pluck some speedy, fast guys, but can he get the linemen? I think there's only so many really good linemen.
I think any group of 5 school, it's the linemen.
Yep.
There's not as many of them. Coach O'Leary always used to say it, you can find skill guys anywhere. Everybody's skill guys, even on the group of 5 level, are as good as the Power 5 guys, but it's who is going to be on those defensive and offensive lines. Now, if you want to talk about the Oregon offense and what Scott Frost is going to do, and maybe a positive point to how that fits in here at UCF, is perhaps you don't have to get offensive linemen that are as big. They're maybe more skilled, they're faster, and maybe that's an easier player for UCF to find at that position than the big pro-style kind of offensive lineman. So that's maybe a positive that we could see here in recruiting someone that's easier to find.
If you look at it sometimes on, ESPN or whatever, if you're watching like Goal Line, you'll go through all these games and you'll see some of the, the top teams have these giant offensive linemen. Some of the lower teams, the lower you get down, sometimes they have smaller linemen. But then again, like you're saying, Oregon, and there's a couple other fast, speedy, teams, that their linemen aren't huge. So, there's definitely been progress made with linemen that aren't giant, but there's definitely a size difference in, say, the Big 12 and the American as well.
I think that's very true, and I think that's something that we'll have to see how that pans out. But one of the things that strikes me is when you think about a position at UCF outside of last season that have never really had any true standouts at that position is linebacker. I mean, UCF has really struggled to find consistent big-time linebackers in our program, especially. We've always really kind of filled holes and filled voids. He's a good friend of mine, but a guy like Corey Hogue, who many UCF fans will know, and even a Josh Lynham when he was out of Mount Dora, or Deland, he's probably going to get mad at me.
If he's watching.
But who's on our staff now recruiting for us. Keep doing what you're doing, Josh. We've always kind of plugged and played with the linebacker position quite a bit. I can't really think of any big-time recruits that we had. We had one guy a few years ago out of Colorado who was like a 4-star linebacker.
Laylon Willingham.
And really just didn't pan out to be the guy we thought he was, and he transferred out of here. So I think that's a part of this team that we probably need to do a better job of recruiting. We struggled at the linebacker position this year, in my opinion. So that linebacker spot is one that I think moving forward in years to come, I would watch that and see how well we're recruited, because we haven't recruited it. It's not been one of those positions like defensive back where we've really put the guys in the NFL. Now, Terrence Plummer, we got everything out of that guy. They had a ton of tackles for this football team, but he wasn't the most talented guy on the field. And he's done a great job early on in his NFL career. I think he may have got waived recently, unfortunately.
From the Vikings, but I'm sure he's out there trying to get something going still.
Right, we got everything out of that guy. And he's one of the great linebackers that we've ever had. But back early on, I'll be careful about what I say, but in the 90s and in the 80s, the Mike Palmers come to mind, and some of these guys, we had some really phenomenal linebackers at UCF, and I hope that we can get back to those ways a little bit with future recruiting classes at that position.
A question we have that I think is geared on offense, but let's ask it for both sides of the ball. What players do you see with the most upside coming into the new season?
Well, you'd certainly maybe start at the receiver position and look at Tristan Payton and Traquan Smith, what Traquan Smith was able to do this year, even Tristan Payton to a lesser degree in his true freshman season, Smith a redshirt freshman. And again, UCF with wide receivers and with Sean Beckton, that's a position that never fails and always finds talent. So those are two guys that I think play right away. And then outside of that, I was talking about it with a friend the other day, it's like, what guys have a guaranteed spot on this team as a main contributor? Maybe outside of those receivers. I think the receivers, those receivers do. And the kicker maybe. Yeah. But yeah, outside of those receivers, it's really wide open everywhere else.
That may have been a conversation you and I were having.
Was it? Maybe.
Yeah. There you go. I don't think we could come up with any. You can't remember. I'll tell you what. I really think that Jordan Franks is going to be a guy that could potentially be a really good player for us in the future. When you think of this style of offense, you don't think it's Frank's. He's not one of these quick guys. But if there is any type of tight end position in this type of offense, it would more be kind of the makeup of a Frank's, a guy that's a bigger wide receiver, but can still block and do some of those type of things. I'm interested to see how they use a guy like him, because I think he could be.
What about Jordan Akins there?
Jordan Akins and the other guy that,
how do you think he fits in?
His injury was pretty bad, from what I understand, and I think that his talent gets him on the field in some regard. I don't know exactly what that is, but if you're Scott Frost and you look back on the film, at least to the beginning of this past season, you're saying, well, I got to find it. This guy was our best player at the skill position on offense, for sure. And so I think that there is a role for him. I don't know what that is exactly. The other asterisk that I have is a guy by the name of Nick Patty. And where, is he considered at the quarterback position again?
Should he be?
You
want to give everybody a chance.
I just never have seen Nick throw the football outside after his days at Dr. Phillips. I mean, he threw a couple of times in games this year, but I don't know if I think from an athletic standpoint, he's probably the most diverse player that we have that could play quarterback.
Because that's how they wanted to utilize him.
That is how
wild night.
They wanted to utilize him in the wild night position. I think that if I were Scott Frost, I would give him a shot just to see what he could potentially be at that position. But I think that Nick Patty is probably a guy that finds his way on the field, number one, because he's an incredibly smart kid and a really good leader, and a guy that I think you can plug and play in a lot of different places that maybe you don't have the players to fit in those roles currently until you have another recruiting class or two. I think Nick Patty's a guy that we may see more so next year than maybe we're thinking about right now.
Now, Carson, you're maybe skeptical is not the right word, but concerned about Frost in a first-year hire. You're not skeptical of the Oregon offense, though.
I personally, for my own sensibilities, I'm not a huge fan of it, and I think that it's a little bit of.
We had this conversation.
Yeah, we did. I think people think that they're getting one thing, and they may be kind of surprised with what the Oregon offense ends up being, because people see the flash and the awe, and the jerseys, and the excitement of what Oregon is. And at its core, the Oregon offense is a running offense. It's a running spread offense that they're going to run the ball significantly more than they're going to throw the ball, just on average. Now, situations may always be slightly different. And it is rather a conservative, wear-you-down offense. It's just run at a faster pace and obviously a lot of play, so that makes it a little bit different. But it is sort of especially at the end of the games, or at the beginning of the game, they're going to try to kind of wear down defenses early with running the ball from side to side. It's not going to be, I even heard a few fans say, pass-happy offense, or whatever term you may use. That's not what the Oregon offense is. And so for me, I harken back to my comment I made about the NFL guys before, is that I really do like when we're in a pro-style offense, or at least at a minimum, maybe some kind of more passing-oriented spread offense like you'd see at Baylor, or what a candidate for this job Dino Babers ran at Bowling Green. That's not what Oregon is. Oregon's almost its own animal to itself. So I've never always been the biggest fan of that kind of style, but hey, if it wins, it wins.
Well, it's going to be interesting for these defenses that have never played against, something like that before. Navy, I think, probably would be, doing it the craziest out of all of them. But it still has, things like that in it, like what Navy does. Navy does a very extreme version of it. I mean, they pass 2 or 3 times a game sometimes, but...
Exactly, and the one thing that you have to remember is that most coaches will tell you the players make things happen. Now, the coaches can put guys in position to make plays, and one of the things that I love about this offense is that there's a check at the line of scrimmage with the sideline. So you get up there, you have a play, and then you can look over the sideline, which we haven't really seen in UCF before. And based on what that look is, then you then call the play. We'll probably see those big, funny picture boards.
Maybe you'll be. I want to get one of those.
That's my goal.
Did Oregon use the signs?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But the thing that you have to remember is that Marcus Mariota won the Heisman. And so it's not like they had guys that are where we are at right now in our program. We don't have any Heisman candidates, and we don't have any Heisman candidates that are going to be there next fall.
Did Oregon have any Heisman candidates before he came along?
Well, they had Josh Johnson and some of those guys that are still on NFL rosters as backups now that were really, really good players. And so I think that if you think you're going to see some magical turnaround next year, I think we're going to see a lot of improvement. Don't get me wrong. If you think we're going to win 10, 12 football games next year, which I've seen people commenting about quite a bit, I think you've got another thing coming. And I think that we're not, it's great to have those expectations, but you got to understand that Scott Frost is going to need some time. I mean, it's not the same program as Tom Herman walking into Houston. We don't have that caliber.
That was an 8-win team the year prior.
We don't have that caliber of athlete. Memphis had done some really good recruiting with Fuente, who's now going to Virginia Tech, before they had the season that they did this year, and they needed a high caliber quarterback to have that season. So yes, schemes, offenses, they're all important. But as Kevin Smith showed you in 2007, a really good player can do a lot for a team, even if the offense isn't that high caliber of an offense. And I think that's reverse. I mean, you need really good players for these offenses and for your teams to be good. And that's essentially what it comes down to. And so that is why recruiting is so crucial.
But fans are fans, and they're going to have high expectations, and they think back to the last winless season and what happened the season after. It's not unrealistic to think that with the right coaching and a year of maturity for the players that have played through this season, that a bowl caliber type season, I mean, that would be a big improvement from 0-12 to 6-6.
6-6, yeah.
Would be a big jump in 1 year.
Well, this year, for some teams to get into a bowl game, they didn't even have
They needed 5 wins.
6
And that APR will probably still be pretty high after next year. What they choose those 5 and 7 teams on is based on the highest APR. So
I think you have to consider, I do think that you have to consider like the difference between 2005 and what 2016 is going to be for us. We're in a different caliber of league in regards to the teams that we're playing against. We're playing against better opponents, better competition. We got Michigan on our schedule next year. I mean, we got some tough games next year, and so I think that's going to make it more difficult and not as easy of a transition as we saw in 2005, because some of the teams on our 2005 schedule just weren't at the caliber of the competition that we're playing now, flat out, because we're in a better conference. It's just the natural progression of the program. And these teams, the American Athletic Conference, we keep talking about this expansion, but in the case that we never get out of this conference for some reason,
better.
it is a good conference.
It's gotten a lot better.
It is a really good
The top
conference.
half is certainly with 4 teams in the top 25 at some point. The bottom half, of which UCF is now a part of, at least for this season, still has a ways to go.
Right.
They really rank at the bottom.
But there are conferences across the country. The Big 12 has, Kansas, and the SEC has Vanderbilt.
Kansas Koozies, I don't know.
The SEC has Vanderbilt, and they have Kentucky, which are notorious, bottom dwellers in that conference. So all those conferences are going to have teams that struggle, but the big difference in the separation, in my opinion, is just the dollars. It's the money, and that's what comes with the Big 12 and the Power 5 conference, because in the AAC, you can potentially play in a New Year's Day Bowl. And 10 years ago, if you were a UCF fan, and we said, someday you're going to have a chance that if you win your championship in your conference, you're going to play in a New Year's Day Bowl, we would have been ecstatic to have that opportunity. And so we do have that opportunity year in and year out now.
It's Houston this year
It
against
is
Florida
Houston.
State.
Right. And so
How big of that would that have been if we were the ones that would have got Florida State?
Well, it might not have been that matchup, but
you just can't forget those.
But still, I mean, that would be huge. I mean, Baylor was big, and going down there to the Fiesta Bowl was big, but imagine, a game like that.
And I think something else to point on when we're talking about comparing next year to what 05 was is not only is the competition better, but again, like we've talked about with this scheme, with this system, it's just going to be radically different. You had carryover from 04 to 05 with the same system, everything implemented the same way. This takes a while to get, and it might not even work out particularly well just because of the kind of players that we have utilized. I think Frost will tinker it to sort of make it work the best for the guys on the roster currently. And then again, the competition, like you mentioned, Houston's going to be very good again next year. USF is still going to be pretty good. Temple loses a lot, but there's still going to be those teams at the top of the conference that are very good, so the competition isn't going to go anywhere.
And on that point, one of the questions we got was, can the pacing of the Oregon-style offense mask some of the deficiencies on the UCF offensive line? Sort of goes into what you're saying about there's a bit of a learning curve and a transition here, but what do you think about that question?
I do think that the scheme is more than the play call itself. The scheme is the tempo. The scheme involves, playing into tempo, how quick you're at the line of scrimmage, not letting defenses sub in and sub out, passing plays virtually being basically running plays, throwing the ball short. Well, in our head, the coaching staff, they're considering that a running play. We may gain 4 yards on a pass, which is nothing on a pass, but on a run, it's a solid run. So the style of play as a whole, outside of which individual play is called, play in and play out, plays into the whole thing, because when you're running up tempo, when you're up and down the field, and you don't give defenses time to sub, that can mask deficiencies. And that is an advantage, and that's part of why this offense and other up-tempo offenses have been so successful, is because they flat out don't allow defenses to sub players and in and out of plays, and their offense, who plays in this day in and day out, is usually much better prepared to be playing 15 to 16 seconds between plays, rather than most teams who huddle after the ball is blown dead and blown in for play. It's usually about 25 to 28 seconds between plays. That 10-second rest in between plays differential is huge. So I think that this offense is the type of offense that can help mask some of the deficiencies that we have. How much can it do so is the real question.
This makes me think of last night I was watching TV and I was watching ESPN, and a 30-on-30 came on that was about Buffalo. And that team that went to the Super Bowl for 4 years in a row, they were one of the first teams in the NFL, at least, to do that no-huddle, really fast thing. And the players that were talking from other teams about that were just like, we don't know what hit us. So you can see where Oregon, the speed that you were talking about, and other teams that do that, everybody's just confused. The quote that I liked the most on that was Howie Long, and he was like, I asked him to slow down at one point. Jim Kelly said that, literally he was yelling from across, slow down, we can't do anything. So it's shock and awe, kind of.
Yeah,
it is.
That plays a huge role into it, and one of the most difficult jobs next year is going to be Mark Daniels in the play-by-play, figuring out how to say what's going on in the game, because it's going to be the tackle, and then we're going to be running another play. It's going to take about half his airtime out of there, so that's going to be something he's even going to have to get adjusted.
But is that even maybe a little bit of an unrealistic expectation that UCF can get there that quickly? Some coaching hires still, but this period right now, what do you think, Carson? Can Frost and his emerging staff close the deal on recruiting with what they've been dealt?
Well, right. They came in with 6 prospects, which is just astoundingly low for this time of the year.
Because nothing's happened in weeks.
And they've come in and got 4 guys, I believe, at least according to the current hour. Maybe it's 5 or 6 since we've been on now, but I think they're going to get up to close to 20. They're going to get there, and that's good enough. Honestly, that when you come in and you're able to do that with the limited time that they have, limited resources with the coaching staff, it's going to be great. I mean, it's going to be a flurry. January is going to be just a month of flurry with all this activity, in-home visits, guys visiting on the weekends. You'll see a lot of them at basketball games. So a little word, just come out to UCF basketball to show kind of a good fan base for UCF. But that you're going to be hearing about guys so much throughout January as they try to build this class and continue to add to it, and about another 10 to 12 guys probably.
So can Scott Frost and the promise of an Oregon-style offense in Orlando, is that enough to flip a guy who's a serious Power 5 commitment?
I don't know the question of that. I think it's case by case, just what that personal individual feels. I do sort of think when we're all talking about signing day in February that there may be 1 or 2 kind of surprises that we're like, wow, look at this guy. Look at on paper, hey, this is one of the better recruits that UCF's got, and I do kind of maybe think that. And then I'm more interested to see, honestly, about recruiting in year 2, 3, and 4, because I almost look at Scott Frost, what he's doing now, you could call it a honeymoon phase. Coming in here, the excitement, recruits hear that, they get excited about that, He's coming in with the Oregon offense. That's sort of an unknown, but players know about Oregon. There's probably a lot of guys on the East Coast that want to go to Oregon, but they're like, it's all the way on the Pacific Northwest.
Over there.
Now they have that option down in Florida and Orlando. So I think Scott Frost, the greatest thing about this hire is maybe that initial recruiting pop and just that buzz and the excitement that it has generated. Year 2, 3, and 4, though, recruiting does become about relationships. How does this staff build? Really starting right now with this first class, setting a precedent for what are your relationships with coaches in the area, what are the kind of different things that you're going to do. Kyle mentioned the players' camps that we really haven't done. Coaches' clinics, another big thing to bring coaches on campus and to build those relationships with coaches. And if the early results are any indication, I think we're in good shape for that, because you got to recruit out of Mainland, which is the best program, on the East Coast from us here. You got to commit from Dr. Phillips. Dr. Phillips is probably the best program over the last decade here in Orlando. So you've got guys from those major winning programs, which is super important. And I think we're making a lot of inroads in South Florida, which is why I think it's especially important to keep a guy like Travis Fisher on the staff. He's currently on the staff. He hasn't been named that he's officially going to be there, but he's recruiting for us. He's kind of our key to the city down there in South Florida, talking to St. Thomas Aquinas, schools in Miami. So those are the pipelines and the kind of relationships that you want to see the staff start to build.
Well, 2 or 3 of those recruits are from Miami as well. So,
right.
I mean, that's I think a big thing, because we weren't in there for a couple of years.
Yes.
Really. So getting down there and getting...
And let's remember, too, St. Thomas Aquinas, former UCF quarterback Ryan Schneider's their offensive coordinator. Their former coach, Rocco Casulo's at Matter Academy, a smaller school down in South Florida. He's a UCF alum. So just like what Kyle mentioned earlier with Kareem Reed being down there at Coconut Creek, there's UCF guys all throughout the state, and maybe we don't know about them as well because we haven't necessarily reached out to those relationships in the last few years. But there's a lot of UCF guys coaching football in this state at that level.
Mike Malatesta is the athletic director at Bishop Moore, who just won the state championship. He played with me for Coach O'Leary as well. So I think those relationships are there to be built with former UCF players. I mean, Coach O'Leary has a pretty phenomenal coaching tree when it comes to guys that have played for him and guys that have gone on to be coaches, not only at the college and the NFL level, but at the high school level, because what he teaches and the way that he runs his program, with some tweaks here and there for some of these younger guys, it's still a really good format to build a program within. And so, it doesn't mean that you have to kind of have the military-style demeanor, but the the core concepts and basic ideologies that he had within the program, those things you could build a program around. And with a different guy leading it at the top for the high school level, certainly you can be very successful. So there's guys that are connected to Coach O'Leary, and I think that we can't really ever lose what he did for our program. We kind of talk about him in past tense now, obviously, and we try, because we're evaluating things, we tend to pull out the negative from the past and talk about how the future is going to be so good, because that's just kind of how fans are. Yeah. But he did so many positive things for us. If it wasn't for Coach O'Leary and the job that he did here, a guy like Scott Frost, a guy like Danny White, those type of guys we don't have here today, and so we struggle. I think that the big thing was that the flat out age of Coach O'Leary really started to hurt recruiting, and that's one of the reasons I don't think we capitalized, or what people would call capitalization, on the Fiesta Bowl as much as we possibly could have, because there's a lot of other schools across this country saying, you see how old George O'Leary is? You don't know if he's going to be there for 4 years.
And that's not just him. That's happened at South Carolina with Steve Spurrier, with Virginia Tech and Frank Beamer. These are legendary coaches at the tail end of their career, and they were facing that same thing on the recruiting.
And it makes it very, very difficult, and those questions are being asked all the time in recruiting and home visits and when recruits are on campus. How long are you going to be here, Coach? And I think that those contracts were basically, well, my contract says I'm here until then.
Well, that's an interesting question now to ask of Coach Frost as well. How long will he be here? One of the things he said during his press conference was that he intended to reach out to Coach O'Leary. What do you think that conversation would sound like?
Very interesting. I have a hard hard time pegging that one.
Maybe some of the coaching tree conversation.
It's such a convergence of different styles, though. You see this a lot. I don't care what sport it is. When you go from one coach to the other, whoever the decision makers are in that process tend to just go for the polar opposite. And that's almost what you've got when you look at George O'Leary and Scott Frost. Now, Frost has been tuteled by some old school coaches that we mentioned at the top of the show, like Bill Parcells, like Tom Osborne. Maybe that's where that common ground and that meeting place came in that O'Leary-Frost conversation. But I did think it was important that you brought up just how meaningful Coach O'Leary was, because anyone that follows me knows that I've had my criticisms of George O'Leary, and I haven't been the biggest fan of certain aspects of the way he's run the program over the years. But everyone gets caught up in the hype of a new hire, and we're all talking about, well, we're going to have fun, the players are going to have fun, everything's going to be fun. Well, my co-host Eric Lopez brought this up to me last week. It was pretty fun when we won the Fiesta Bowl. It was pretty fun to last year win a game at ECU on a Hail Mary that I was at and you were at, and share the conference title. So let's not forget that there was a lot of fun in winning under Coach O'Leary, and hopefully we have the same level or even greater success and greater levels of winning under Scott Frost. But the coaching search and hiring a coach is always an inexact science. You can never quite say, well, this guy's definitely going to be a success or definitely going to be a failure. It remains to be seen.
It definitely does. This has been kind of weird. I know I've been quiet over here. Like, crazy things going on. I'm trying to get some questions from people. I've got a smoke detector that's beeping in my house now. I don't know. Well, you know, this has definitely been an experience. We're definitely going to do more of these things, obviously. Somebody asked
shows from the 11:48.
Yeah. Somebody asked a question that they wanted you to answer earlier.
Yeah.
And it was about Coach O'Leary.
Yeah.
I gotta find it.
Okay.
I think it was, when did Coach O'Leary get the maddest at you or something, and what did he say to you? You can
narrow it down to just one.
Yeah, you can paraphrase if you would like. That was
It's a family show, so you could leave.
Yeah, it was Space Coast night, and he asked, what was the single time that GOL was angriest at you, and what exactly did he tell you?
Yeah,
You don't have to say exactly what he told you.
I usually try to compartmentalize those things, and those are behind me. But I can tell you that there was definitely 2 times that I remember him getting most mad at me, from what I can remember to this day. Now that at the quarterback position, as you know, playing that position for him, he gets mad quite often, both good and bad. You know, I didn't feel good, but sometimes I said, okay, I wasn't the only one when I would see Blake Bortles come off the field, and the player that he was for our program and coach was still in his face. So I said, okay, it's not all personal. It's the position. But there was one time after I broke my leg in 2005, or in spring of 2005, and I was not able to participate in fall camp. And you know, Coach O'Leary has his particulars, and one of those is where everybody stands at practice. And he always kind of stands on the left behind the offense, and then everybody else is not in the play is really behind the center and to the right. And I wasn't able to practice coming off the broken leg, and I was standing over to his left about 10 feet away with my legs crossed and my arms like this, and he lost it. Absolutely went off, asking me if I wanted to be a part of this program, quit having a pity party for myself. Does he want me to have it? He was going to kick me out of the indoor facility at this point in time, and I was just trying to get a good angle at practice, and he thought I was just over here upset that I wasn't able to participate. And so that was just a little microcosm of like, golly, I didn't think I was doing anything wrong, and seems like the worst thing I've ever done. And then obviously in 2007, we were beating East Carolina at halftime, and we came out in that second half, and I think there were like 5 possessions where we had turnovers, and I threw an interception when we were going down to score. I was trying to throw a wheel route to Corey Rapazinski down the sideline and just never saw the corner. And I can't tell you what he said, but I've never seen a face go from white, red, and then purple like his face did at that point in time. And I think that ECU game was the epitome of him being extremely mad. I think when we lost to South Florida, the whole day was horrible.
He wasn't the only one upset with you that day.
I told him before this that I was probably as mad as he was. I remember storming out.
Everybody has been mad at you.
Everybody has been mad at me at some point. And there were some good times. I've heard it both ways. But that's just kind of par for the course for the position. And I'm proud of everything I did with the program. But when George O'Leary the way that he handled people screwing up, magnified it big time, because a lot of times coach will just let you run to the sideline and you can get to the bench and kind of escape, and fans are a little bit tipsy and just are watching the next play. But he likes to approach quarterbacks and get in our face and let us know what he's thinking in that particular moment. So there were times where he wasn't happy, but I will tell you that one of the best conversations I ever had with Coach O'Leary was after we lost to South Florida 64-12 or whatever it was in 2007, and we had a team meeting right when we got back from that game, which is very strange. We would never have a team meeting. Everybody would just go their separate ways. And he brought me into his office and said, we got to turn this around now, and it starts with you. And he said, what can I do? I said, Coach, I don't really feel pressure from fans or from anything else, but I feel pressure between you and I don't know why that is. I would think that should be something that I feel supportive of. And he's like, you just need to have fun. Whatever I got to do, I'll let you be with Coach Salem from now on. I'm not going to give you a hard time, but you need to find a way to have fun because it's your senior year, and that's extremely important to me, is seeing you enjoying yourself. And we went on to win 7 games in a conference championship. So at the time where I thought he would be mad at me the most, he had some positive, encouraging words when we kind of had that one-on-one moment that I'll always remember. So, he had a weird way of kind of making you feel good sometimes, but it was few and far between. But when he did, it was poignant and it meant something, and those are the type of things that I won't forget about him.
That's cool. That's cool. Also, one other question from him. This is for you and I both. Who was the single best player that you ever played against? I'm going to take that as me. I played on defense. You played on offense. So who was the single best defensive player that you ever played against? That you can,
That I can remember. I think the Griffin guy, he was a safety for Texas when we played them in 2007. Michael Griffin. He was just all over the football field. Actually, he was the guy that came down and made me fumble in that game on the sideline there late in the fourth quarter or mid-fourth quarter. But I just remember him always being back in pass coverage, but supporting the run just incredibly. And so he was really, really good. To tell you the truth, there's a lot of really good players I faced along the way. But Michael Griffin, and then the Selvey guy out of South Florida, and I think that there was another guy on that defensive line that year that was really, really good, that's been in the NFL for quite some time now.
It wasn't Jason Pierre-Paul?
Yeah, it was Jason Pierre-Paul. Okay. Those two guys, when they had Selvey and Jason Pierre-Paul at South Florida, that was an incredible front right there, and those are probably the best guys that I can remember playing against.
Well, I played in the Big 12. It's interesting that you mentioned Texas, because that's where I had 2 players actually. They were kind of a duo at the time in 1996. Well, a little bit before your time, but Priest Holmes and Ricky Williams were.
I've heard of those.
Yeah. Were both. They were the running backs at that time at Texas.
Yeah, pretty good.
And it was a dual, thing where they both ran the ball. You'd have one of them, then you'd have the other one, then you'd have the other one. And it went back and forth, and it was an absolute nightmare.
Sure.
As a defensive player, a corner, a safety, a linebacker, whatever, those guys would both run over you, or they would just, I got plowed, in that game that year, worse than I have ever been hit in my life by an offensive guy. It was Priest Holmes that hit me. It was nice.
There are a lot of guys who say that same thing about getting Priest Holmes.
It was nice to see those guys, though, go on. Well, Priest Holmes at least. Ricky Williams, I think, yeah. his story got skewed a little bit, but Priest Holmes at least was always a really great guy, and did a wonderful job in the NFL. He wound up being a Chief as well.
What years were you at Kansas?
1992 to 96.
So you missed Scott Frost.
Yes. Scott Frost was there the next year after in Nebraska. But yeah. So that was good times. That was the year that we moved from the Big 8. 1996 was the year that we moved from the Big 8 to the Big 12.
Okay.
Where we added the Texas schools. So that was a big year, and Texas and Nebraska, I believe, were in the Big 12 championship that year, and Nebraska went ahead and I believe Nebraska was national champions that year.
They had 12 teams then?
Yes. 12 teams in the Big 12. Yeah. So
Might be nice again.
it would be nice. That's another reason why I would love, if it ever happens, UCF gets a chance to play in the Big 12. That's another reason why I would love it, because I know all those teams. One of those teams is my alma mater.
I got coasters for one of those.
Well,
teams.
I know them again. Yeah. I had to have a little bit of something. I had my Kansas City Chiefs gnome up there, which somebody commented earlier, and the UCF one side by side. I'm sorry that I haven't got to a lot of these comments.
Are there a lot of questions in there?
There are some questions in here. I can get back through here and see if...
Somebody asked you about Tommy Frazier.
Was there a Tommy? Oh, yeah. Tommy Frazier was the quarterback at Nebraska, I believe, before Scott Frost.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. So, yes, definitely had, Tommy Frazier issues as well. But, not nearly as much as I remember. It was my last year. I got to play a little bit more my senior year, of course, because I was a walk-on, and there were a lot of times that I never got to play. So, but I remember that Texas game a lot more than anything else. So, somebody does ask. Here's a question. I was going to talk about this earlier. There was a lot of talk this week and last week and whatever about there being a 0-12 bowl game. Because they needed, these 5 and 7 teams or whatever to come in and fill a bowl, well, why not just have the 2 teams that are 0-12? What would you guys think about that? I mean,
people would watch that.
I think
people would watch it, but I think it would be extremely embarrassing to our program to be in a
Kansas would never agree to it.
To the 0-12 bowl game. I mean, I think that it's kind of funny to talk about, but can you imagine being a player on a team and them saying, "Yeah, you're going to go play in a bowl because you guys suck"? That's
the way the number of bowls are going up, we're getting close to a point where everybody will get a bowl.
I think it's funny to talk about, and I think it would be people would watch it out of the novelty of who's going to really be the worst team?
Yeah.
But I mean,
especially with an interim staff, it really would have been no benefit to UCF for the extra practices that you normally get, which is huge, even for maybe a 6-6 team that hopes they have bigger aspirations in the year to come. They get that bowl practice, but with an interim staff, I didn't like when the people brought that up. The season's over. The season's over. It's fun.
It's fun to think about, though.
Yeah,
for sure. I don't know who would win that game, honestly. Who would you pull for?
Oh, he's acknowledged this on.
Yeah, we talked about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would. Yeah.
Coaster has the answer.
It's obvious that I'm spending my time and money to do a UCF, podcast and all that, but my alma mater is Kansas.
I have to respect that.
Yeah, I would be rooting for my alma mater.
You'd be wearing the only split Kansas UCF jersey on the
Ever.
Saturday.
If that was possible and I could get that done, absolutely I would do that. But yes, I think I would be rooting for UCF against the Big 12 team, number one. I always, I don't care who you are, if your record's 0-12 or whatever. There's always going to be an underdog in every game, unless there's not, I guess. Unless there,
Except for those times it's not.
But there's not a lot of times where it's not, a 2-point underdog or whatever.
That game would be like the worst case imaginable for recruiting.
Yeah. Well, we were in the. They didn't go in the toilet bowl, of course.
But it's an awful city as well.
Right, yeah. Put it in
Birmingham at the old stadium, Legion Field, which is by far the worst place I've ever
But
been.
what this does bring up something interesting with both the Danny White hire and the Scott Frost hire. UCF has had some difficulty scheduling games out into the future. Does this open up some possibilities?
I'm not sure. I
with some
think it's tough to play. It's just been tough to find opponents. Honestly, what may have opened the door more than anything is being 0-12. Because now the fear of
we the homecoming opponent
maybe
now?
the fear of UCF is a little bit downgraded in people's eyes. We've seen a lot of Power 5 schools in recent years schedule USF. Maybe because they're just not as big of a challenge at the time as UCF. It's a little bit short-sighted because you never know how quickly things can turn around at any one program. But if anything opens the doors for some games, I think it would be the 0-12. I'm interested to see what Danny White does with that. He did address that at the press conference, and kind of a strange answer, but just that basically that him and Coach Frost had to get together and decide what their scheduling philosophy might be. He said it may not be any different than what they've done leading up to that, but that they would just have to get together and decide on a scheduling
Well,
philosophy.
their big thing was they weren't going to do any more 2-for-1s or
Right.
one-offs, except, of course, when you get a big payday from Ohio State or a big
Michigan.
payday from Michigan, and then you do the one-off.
Right.
So it'd be interesting to see if that changes on the 1-for-1.
I think that's the biggest thing, Trace, and a great point. I think that is what we really have to evaluate, in my opinion, because I think it's much easier to get those games with the 2-for-1s. Now, I don't think that we're going to do many one-offs, but the 2-for-1 games, when this day in college football, when you just need to play great, talented teams, and now there's more upper echelon Power 5 teams that know they can't play FCS opponents, but I think that the 2-for-1 trade-off is probably something that allows us to get that better team to play against, rather than Coach O'Leary's style of, hey, it's 1-for-1. It's one.
But they
and one.
bent that when they needed to.
They bent it a little bit, but I don't think they bent it as much as they possibly could have. I think that there's probably other games out there with maybe some in-state schools and beyond that if you would play the 2-for-1s, you would have some better games. And I'm, for one, am extremely excited to go up to Michigan next year. As a fan, I understand that revenue is key, right? And you want to get those big teams in our home stadium for home games. But from just a pure fan perspective, I loved going to Ohio State and watching that game. It was a great experience and a really good football game. I love the idea of going to Michigan next year to the big house, and I loved playing at Penn State and at Wisconsin early in my career. Now, at that point in time, we truly were the team going in there to collect the check. But nonetheless, I mean, I think it's a great experience for the players. I think it's a really cool experience for the fan base to get to travel to these big-time college football campuses across the country to get an exposure to what it's like for people to really live and die by football every fall. And so I think those things aren't going to bring revenue in, but still have to be somewhat considered in the evaluation process when you think about, hey man, there's a lot of people already talking about going to Ann Arbor this next upcoming season. The fan base get excited about it.
And I don't mind the one-offs because at the end of the day, those build your brand. So do it whatever way you've got to do it, but play those big-time schools, kind of put UCF on the national map and show who UCF is, as we've been doing a little bit here in the last few years. So I don't really have a problem so much with the one-off games. But the other element that makes scheduling tougher now is because of all the restrictions that some of these larger conferences have now in scheduling, putting a ninth conference game into their slate.
With the Big 12 and
And some of the mandates that you have to play a certain number of Power 5 schools at a conference every year. So that's made it a little difficult too. But you mentioned some of the stuff rumored in state. The one thing that I would love is more neutral site games. Ireland, I think, was a great experience for UCF. There's been that rumored thing of Miami, maybe a 3-game series, 1 game in Orlando at Bright House, 1 game down in Miami, and then 1 game at the Citrus Bowl. I think that would be a really great scenario if that could get worked out between all the parties.
What you'd said was that there's been a lot accomplished during the O'Leary era, and and we shouldn't forget that. But it is a new era, and they won't throw everything out, but we will expect new things. Mention of perhaps a nighttime spring game. I mean, sort of the expect the unexpected now. We don't know where they're going to go. They're not going to throw everything out that has been built.
No.
And you talk about brand. UCF has done a good job of building brand. You hear it now on the announcers. You see it in the graphics. That is more the brand. Now they just have to restore it to its...
And that is the one thing that I worry about with the jerseys. Overall, I think the new jerseys and helmets and whatever we do there are good and a net positive, especially when it comes to recruiting. But the brand is important for a school like UCF that still, even though it's gained so much national notoriety in football over the last 5 years, still maybe some people around the country are vague about who exactly is UCF. That stacked logo that Todd Stansbury sort of instituted is, hey, we're not going to do the other logos as much. Those are secondary. The stacked UCF logo, that's our primary logo. I think that's been extremely huge in allowing everyone to know who UCF is around the country because they see that and, okay, now we know who they are. They're identifiable by one singular thing, and that's important for a young brand like UCF to continue to push that.
I think we saw that all the way back to 2006, transitioning into 2007. Myself and a former softball player at UCF, Shelly Frick, were the two student-athlete representatives that were part of the rebranding committee from when we went to the UCF with a little sword going with the lance going through them, and the lance, and then to what we now have is the stacked logo and the uniforms that we've had back in the Adidas days before we got to Nike. But as a student athlete and being on that board that helped make that decision, I remember we had about 26 different potential logos and color schemes, and we brought it back down to that stacked logo. And that was important, and I think that getting to a point where we can really stay consistent, like Todd Stansbury wanted to do with that moving forward. Obviously, it's great to have all these different ideas, but really at the core of everything Oregon is the O, right? And that they find a way to get that basically into everything. Now they have the little duck wings and they have the accents, but the core concept at Oregon is that O. And so we have to make sure that despite all the potential different things we may have, we have to have that one core thing. And what is that? I think it still needs to be that stacked logo in some shape or form.
Definitely. More questions?
We're working on some here. I think our lights are starting to die. We're running out of battery. I was trying to... this has been fun. It takes quite a bit to do something like this in your living room, just kind of the 1148 studios, whatever. But
I now actually know why it's the 1148 studios because I didn't realize that until this very minute, and then I realized that was the house number. So now I understand.
We won't give you the rest of that.
No.
Yes, it is my house number. That's I was looking for something one day and like, hey, blah, blah,
There was
blah.
some kind of sponsorship, and they're like, well, they never mentioned what 1148 is, so I'm trying to bring you sponsorship driving around the neighborhood. It's like, where am I at? Oh, wait, he's at 1148.
That's it.
Well, before we dim out, Carson, where can people find you?
On Twitter is the best place, at CAINGLE on Twitter, and I try to be pretty active on there, and obviously host the Sports Talk Florida Insider Show on Saturdays with Eric Lopez from 11 to 1 on 1080 The Team, and then various writing projects pop up here and there and everywhere. So.
And Kyle, talk a little bit about what you're up to. I know you share it every week. The menu specials there at the Little Greek.
Yeah, we're at Little Greek right now. Myself and my two partners are the area developers for Central Florida. So this is the first of 20 locations that we'll have here right now in the Tri-County area, Seminole, Orange, Osceola County. We will move into Lake County just a little bit. But we are currently seeking franchisees for franchising opportunities. You could do one franchise at a time, unlike many different franchises across the U.S. where you have to purchase 2 or 3 locations. I'd be more than happy to talk about it. You can find me on Facebook, Kyle Israel, or KIsrael07 on Twitter. But if you have any questions, you're interested in the franchising business, like I said, we're going to have about 12 to 14 of those.
It's great
stores
food too.
in Central
I mean, it is
Florida.
really,
And we like to hear when people come in.
Yes,
and
and
they've
I-
heard you on the podcast.
I have had a number of people come in that have all the way from North Carolina listened to the podcast and came down and said something to John Bishop, who lives up in North Carolina. I didn't remember his name last time. I do now. He came into the store before one of our home games and said hello and said he heard on the podcast. So I appreciate it. And I'm doing a show on 740 called the Football Roundtable every Thursday night from 6 to 8, which I like. It's kind of like an open format. I go in there with no notes, no idea what I'm going to talk about, and just get on the microphone and start going. So it's kind of a fun way to do radio for me, and you can listen to that 6 to 8 on 740.
And you don't need lights.
I don't need like
yeah, well, now I know that those lights last about an hour and a half, so it's good to know.
Yeah, now we know.
I have plug-in lights, but I wanted to try the battery one, so now we know. So anyway, thank you to you guys, though, for tuning in every week and listening to us on the podcast and checking out what we were doing here and all the rest of the stuff that we do. We do this for you guys. That's the only reason we do it. So thank you very much. Want to thank these guys as well for being here, taking a Sunday night, off the business and everything else. I also want to thank upstairs Tina for running my fiance, for pushing buttons for us and getting this whole thing working with me tonight. It's not an easy job to do. So everything is upstairs here because I didn't want to have an entire bunch of computers over
It
here.
still is your house.
It's a lot of stuff to move. I have more of a studio upstairs and all that stuff. So we will definitely do these things again. We're gonna start doing a live podcast just with audio. We won't need lights for that. Once a month. I want to thank YouTube, honestly, for giving us this ability to do this kind of stuff. It's cool. It's free. There's nothing better than that. They'll even pay us a little bit for doing this. So that makes a world of difference. So thank you guys for tuning in. I'm Andrew Phegley.
I'm Trylko. Go Knights!
Charge on.
It's time! Ladies and gentlemen,
UCF charge onto the field. With our spirits we'll never yield. Black and gold charge right through the line. Victory is our cry. BSCTO or Y tonight.